Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Lianne Mandelbaum. She's a patient advocate. Today's Kevin MD article is What Avery's Death in Rome Teaches Us About the Gaps in Food Allergy Education. Lianne, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so tell us what your latest article is about.
Unfortunately, it's about a food allergy tragedy. It's about a United States student studying abroad in Italy who went to a restaurant and ordered avocado toast and communicated that she had a tree nut allergy, and yet somehow the avocado toast came with a pesto that contained ground cashews, and she ingested them, and unfortunately she didn't make it. And we go through a variety of the details within the article and where we can learn from and hopefully prevent more deaths, and really where the gaps are in food allergy education, both from the physician standpoint, the patient standpoint, and unfortunately, as I've written about many times, food allergies are an invisible disease that sometimes we need a little cooperation from the people around us, i.e., restaurant owners, friends to back us up or use our epinephrine. We need some sort of cooperation from those around us in order to stay safe. And so, I think I'm going to highlight the gaps in all three of those categories. That's really my goal here today.
All right, so before we talk about the gaps, tell us more about the story itself. So it sounds like we had this student order this avocado toast, and it sounds like she did the right thing. She informed the staff that she had this allergy,
Yeah.
and yet she was still given this pesto with cashews in
Yep.
them. So tell us a little bit more in terms of what happened next. Did she have an EpiPen? What happened next just immediately after the exposure?
Originally, when I wrote the story, it was reported that she didn't, that she collapsed trying to go home to her apartment to get her steroid pills. And that seemed to be the focus. But then her parents and the friends that were with her ended up speaking out and saying no, she had three auto injectors with her. But the first step was her Benadryl and her inhaler, which we need to get rid of that. I mean, we just do. When you're having, anaphylaxis, and it's clear that she knew, we need to educate patients about using epinephrine first and using it fast. That there's this stigma that still surrounds epinephrine, whether it's because of the needle, and now we have other choices. We have nasal spray, neither here nor there for this story, but we need to get rid of the stigma. Just like you could do CPR pretty much on anyone, and it's seen pretty seamlessly throughout society, using an auto injector or the nasal spray needs to become part of the public health consciousness and the consciousness, quite frankly, of restaurants. So then she did use, I'm not sure of the time, it hasn't come out yet, how long she realized when the inhaler and the Benadryl weren't working. So then she did go to her three auto injectors, which she was carrying with her. And apparently, the reports from the friends say that the first one failed. I'm not sure if that was a failure in how they used it, a failure in the medication getting delivered, but then she did get two subsequent epinephrine doses. She still did not get better. They called EMS. EMS came, but they didn't have epinephrine on them. So what they tried to stabilize her with was not epinephrine. So you can see where all the failures are within that story. And the thing is, no one should die of a food, not a child, not a student studying abroad, not someone going out to dinner for their birthday. These are preventable deaths. And these are all titles we've seen recently in the news. And they create powerful advocates. I've met far too many parents who have lobbied for change on the backs of their loss. And it just shouldn't be. These are preventable deaths. We have the tools. We need to teach everybody how to use them, and we need to raise the way that people think about food allergies. And you and I have talked about this so many times. It's not a diet, it's not a fad, it's a disease, and it merits respect. And I think part of the problem is, and then this goes to, and I'm not speaking to Avery's case because I can't, I don't have these details, but I do know that teens and young adults don't want to be perceived as different. I mean, research bears that out. And so when there are jokes made constantly in the mainstream media, in movies, on social media about those, snowflakes with food allergies, I think that it fosters silence where you need to teach a young person and an adult, quite frankly, to speak up. So we need to not foster silence. We need to foster advocacy. We need to empower people. We need to have, again, physicians, the general public, the people that have the disease themselves say there's a third rail. These jokes aren't funny. And they lead to people being afraid to speaking up. So that's part of it. That's part of the education that's needed. And I mean, I came across a tweet the other day. I actually pulled it up because I wanted to read it because I see it every year at this time. And it says, 6 years ago, my best friend died on her 21st birthday. As I do every year, I will encourage you to hug someone you love a little tighter for me today because we went out to dinner and she didn't come home because of a food allergy. Food allergies are scary. Take them seriously. And I think that is, in a nutshell, what we need. We need people to take them seriously. And we need, one of the things I wrote about in this article is I had just come back from a brilliant conference put on by Jim Baker at the University of Michigan Food Allergy Center. And it was all this hope for food allergy treatments. The fact that we have two new FDA treatments and there are, monoclonal cocktails in clinical trials, and Aravax has got a vaccine coming up that attacks T cells that, there's so much hope. And then I read about this death.
Hmm.
And we need to be taking more action because those treatments are far down the path. And so one of the conversations I had at that conference was with Dr. Scott Shisher of Mount Sinai in New York. And he and I were talking about sometimes he's seeing patients come in right before they go to college. And the last time he saw them, they were 3 years old. And so they haven't learned the skills to go out in the world, to learn how to read a restaurant menu,
Hmm.
to decipher labels, perhaps to even think about the fact that that was a vegan restaurant with the avocado toast, and to know that vegan restaurants often now these days are using ground nuts to make up for not using cheese. I mean, that's also education, knowing that you're going into to double check, because knowing that you're going into that restaurant, which may very well have an elevated risk. So communication skills are so important. And then we were talking about how so many patients actually don't get referred by their primary care physician to an allergist. And the
Hmm.
primary care physician, who's overwhelmed with everything about this person's health and very little time, doesn't necessarily have these conversations. And it made me think about, with my son, we've been practicing. I mean, now he's in college, but we have been practicing for years, letting him order, letting him make the mistakes. And, and I'll sit there and I'll let him order. And he hasn't mentioned the peanut allergy. This is a few years ago now. Isn't there something else you want to say? Oh yeah, I have a peanut allergy. It's even a kid with the best intentions and who's been ingrained. I can't tell you how many times I was like, and like now it's ingrained into his head, but it took multiple me interrupting or hinting or telling the server myself, quite frankly. So these are life skills. These are not reading menu skills. So I think that, you know, that's something physicians can do differently, perhaps if they can refer to a specialist that hopefully will have, you know, help patients build
Hmm.
skills over time, risk assessment, restaurant advocacy. And I think I would also talk to any physician treating anyone with a food allergy to ask this question in your head: would my patient know what to do if they were traveling abroad? So I think these are conversations that are very quick and that could make a very big difference.
So specific to Avery's story, and I know unfortunately you hear many, many cases of tragic outcomes like that. Tell me some of the common threads that you see in these stories. This getting back to Avery's story, just a foreign student just ordering a simple avocado toast at a restaurant. What can we learn, or what can other students listening to you hear? What can they learn from this?
I think they need to learn survival skills, right? And survival skills when you have a food allergy are very different than just going and worrying about food poisoning in another country or not liking the food. I think you need to speak up. You need to, especially if there's a language gap, there are many, many websites that have language cards where, for example, I remember that we went to Israel and I had in Hebrew printed out cards about Josh's food allergy, his peanut allergy, so that in case like they didn't understand what I was saying, or they, sometimes there's a language barrier and someone nods yes, but they don't actually understand everything you've said. So to take that out, it could be very, very helpful to have these language translation cards that say, I have a life-threatening allergy to peanuts. I can't have anything that's come in contact with peanuts, or, you could talk about cross-contamination, whatever conversation you would want to have with the chef. And I would say that if you're going into a place that actually serves your allergen, and of course, there are many people who are allergic to multiple foods. So realistically, it might be a place that serves their allergen. Talk to the chef.
Mhm.
Don't talk to the front of the house. At a minimum, send your chef card back there and get confirmation that the chef has read it, he understands the severity, because maybe it will make a difference, especially if there's a language barrier, because that person may have thought they understood what you said, or they may not be educated in what a food allergy is. And again, we've talked about that, is it's not a runny nose. So I think that's one of the most important things, using your epinephrine first and fast, knowing that, there's no downside. People seem to think needle, heart issues,
Mhm.
these are the common fallacies that you hear people talk about. No downside. No downside. There is a downside if you don't use it quick enough. And we know from medical research that the quicker you get it in, the more positive the outcome is. Even people who don't succumb to anaphylaxis, if they've waited and they've used their epinephrine, they're more likely to need a second shot in the emergency room than people who have given it right away, which is why sometimes actually food allergy patients face skepticism when they show up in the ER, because they look totally normal after
Mhm.
using it if they used it very quickly. And they're like, wait, why are you here? So I think like that's the most important thing. Carry your epinephrine. Don't be scared to use it. No downside. Use language cards. This young woman did have supportive friends. She did communicate this to the restaurant, according to the police report. I'm not sure where the breakdown was, but in Europe, they do full investigation. So we will find out. It's just we don't know the specific details now.
So I know by sharing Avery's story and coming on this podcast and writing about it, you're trying to transform this tragedy into something more positive, into a constructive teaching moment. So what has the response been to this story, just from publicizing in the news and from your world in food allergy? What has the response been?
The world in food allergy, of course, is heartbreak. As we've always written about how like we feel every anaphylaxis tragedy personally, because humans are imperfect and we all make mistakes. So once again, we're left with, there are people who are upset that her first device didn't work, but the lesson there is always carry more than one device,
Hmm.
right? For the most part, she had a lot of ground cashews in what she ate, and cashews is a very potent allergy. Even in the recent trials of Xolair that's now approved, it's a shot that blocks IgE and is a treatment now approved by the FDA for food allergies. When the lead physician in the study was presenting it at the research symposium where it was announced the approval was approved, the doctor who was presenting it said that cashew was one of the hardest allergies to treat.
Hmm.
So she got a lot of dose. So I would say don't panic. For the most part, your epinephrine does work. And especially if you use it quickly. And of course, sometimes you see the comments like, well, what is she doing going into a vegan restaurant? Like, this is her fault. Why was she eating out? If she had, so you still get those societal blaming the victims. And so we still do have a lot to do insofar as, again, educating the greater public. I feel like these same people are the ones that say, don't fly, just don't get on the plane. And I think we also really see the need for transparent labeling in restaurants. In the United States, we don't have any requirements. For example, there's a bill that a 9-year-old is championing in California called the Addie Act. And Addie's mom is a pediatric nurse practitioner. And they are trying to get menus just to list the top allergens. And it's absurd that we don't have this yet. So, I think all consumers deserve to know what's in their food, especially at a restaurant, especially up in the air, and that we're not there yet. So I feel like everybody should hopefully be supporting these efforts. Labeling in the United States, there was a mom just reported that died from a cookie. She went to Safeway. This happened a month ago. Just came up on my radar. She went to Safeway and got her favorite oatmeal raisin cookie. She's 60 years old. So I guess a grandmother, maybe, not even a mom, but she went and took a bite of the cookie and they put peanut butter cookies in there instead of
Mm.
oatmeal. Didn't say if she used epinephrine, but she did pass away sadly. And then again, people are saying, well, how stupid do you have to be to not recognize an oatmeal cookie? Well, you pick up a box, you see the label. She took one bite. It's not like she ate the whole cookie and didn't taste the peanut all along. As soon as she took the bite, she knew something was wrong. So stop blaming the victim. Let's advocate for better labeling in the United States, both on packaged foods and in restaurants. And, I think we need to have stringent in Europe. There are fines. There's really no repercussions that we hear of for US food manufacturers. So I think, creating some sort of accountability, but also knowing that because there are these lapses in the United States system, even more urgent to carry your auto injector or
Mhm.
nasal spray everywhere, and even more urgent to use it first line of treatment. If you know you're having an allergic reaction, again, no downside. We really need to remove the stigma. We have to. I don't know. I could shout it, on the top of a building, but we need help in removing the stigma.
We're talking to Lianne Mandelbaum. She's a patient advocate. Today's Kevin MD article is What Avery's Death in Rome Teaches Us About Gaps in Food Allergy Education. Lianne, let's end with some take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Okay. Avery did everything right on paper, right? So her death underscores the fact that, trying to put this in words, it's a systematic failure that
Mhm.
happened. It's a public health failure. It's not just a personal one. If you're a physician and you can refer to an allergist, because it's really important that this is a continuum when you see your patient of education, not just a one-off, because that's not going to necessarily imprint the lessons that could one day save this person's life. I think we have to normalize training in anaphylaxis, just like it's normalized to do CPR training. In fact, I'd love to see it within CPR training. I think
Mhm.
we need to normalize having them in EMS kits on planes. I think they need to be in concert venues. One day it would be great to have them in all restaurants so that if somebody, for some reason, leaves their life-saving medicine behind, there's backup. I think if you're a physician, again, ask the question, is my patient prepared for college? Are they prepared for traveling abroad? Is there more of a conversation? Is there a question I need to ask to tease out? Many teams just they go out into the world, they're unarmed with these life-saving skills, and that's what they are. They are life-saving skills, survival skills, as we
Mhm.
put it before. We have to teach advocacy. It's not just teaching how to read a label. You need to, public speaking is really hard. It's really hard for adults. So imagine like you have to now teach a teen who doesn't want to be different to speak up out to dinner with all their friends, right? I think about there was a death in Pennsylvania. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember this person went to a Chinese restaurant. They had always eaten Chinese food before. They didn't see peanuts listed because, again, restaurants in the US don't have to declare.
Mhm.
And they died from an egg roll because what I learned, and I didn't even know this, is that to seal the egg roll paper, a lot of people use peanut butter paste. So it's not you can't be silent. There's a cost to the silence. And so encouraging people, grooming people to be able to speak well in public, not creating anxiety, but creating a necessary amount of small fear that you do need to advocate for yourself because this pesto could have cashews in it. This,
Mhm.
we need to, it's not creating anxiety, it's creating survival. And I think we need to flip that because a lot of people say, I don't want to make my child anxious. I know so many people whose kids they think have mild allergies and oh, it's not like your child. And there is no mild allergy. And most of the deaths that have happened, people have had mild reactions in the past. So we've also got to get past that myth that, every food allergy reaction is an N equals one. You don't, if there's enough of the allergen, if there's cofactors like taking a Tylenol or, going to the gym, we have to realize that past reactions don't predict the severity of future ones, which may become fatal. So again, survival skills. And then the most important thing is we have to include first responders, schools, universities, and hospitality workers in this education loop. We have to find a way to get the seriousness of the disease within that group. And first responders should be carrying epinephrine. We should be fighting for that in everyday life, everywhere. But that's why, again, speaking on this platform, I'm just hoping that people hear this who need to hear this before we have tragedies, and no more funerals. But hopefully, things we've been chipping away, and I think people are more open to the idea of a food allergy being serious. And it doesn't hurt that the adult onset crisis is skyrocketing with no real answers as to why it's here. So, if people are not doing this for their loved one, it could be your loved one one day. So I think that we all win when we look out for one another. I would leave people with that. And you never know if you're going to be one of the people that has this adult onset, if it's going to be your spouse, your child, your loved one. Be kind to people who have food allergies. They're not trying to be difficult. They really are not. They are trying to survive. And I think that's the key word of this podcast. We need to teach people how to survive in a world that's often not equipped to protect them. And we have to keep pushing for a world where safety is the standard, not a matter of luck. There's absolutely no reason for some of these mistakes to have occurred. And that's because we're not pushing safety as a standard, and it is luck. And when your luck runs out, your luck runs out. And that's not how a good system should work.
Lianne, again, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. And thanks again for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much for giving the patient a voice.